Mansoor, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, it sounds like you're driving a car. Can you hear me? I heard you short, but now you're muted. I
Yeah, I can hear you. What do you mean it sounds like I'm driving a car?
don't know. It doesn't sound like you inside of a building. So I guess we're gonna I don't know if we should if I should share. I tried to share it, but it gave me a message saying it couldn't be reshared. So I'm gonna try it again. Share via post. Post. It says, "We're sorry we weren't able to send your post. Would you like to retry or save the post in draft?" Hit retry. Nope. Save it in draft. So I don't know. One of those things.
I put headphones on. How does this sound?
You sound good. And I also how's my background sound?
Fine.
Okay, great. Do you want me to wait a few minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Just let me know when you think we should start. Because Dr. McDowell's not here. So I'll send her a message too. Thank you to the people who are here. Hopefully, we will be starting probably in about 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay. Thanks for coming again. Okay, Monsieur, I think I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Is that okay, or should I wait for Dr. McDowell? What are your thoughts?
We can go ahead and just get started with conversation, and then as folks join, we just add them in as speakers and loop
That
them
sounds
into wherever
good.
we're at.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I can't tell if we have an anonymous section or how many people are in there. How do you check that?
I don't think we can.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, thank you for those of you who are here and who will later listen to this recording. Our purpose was to talk about the efforts that we made specifically in Ohio in follow up to the activities of the OMB in its plans to revise the race and ethnicity categories that started back as far as 2021. And I think I can put a, well, at some point, I will put a uh, timeline, if you haven't already seen it, in the Jumbotron. So you can see the progression of what happened. So there was like a number of us who were very, very involved in the process. And I think many of us saw the potential risk with us not having an opportunity to disaggregate the race classification as it relates to the category of persons who identify as Black. And so, what was really interesting for me, and at some point disappointing, is when after this 3 year process we had gone through, that the decision was made to almost table the classification that we were trying to advance, which included being able to identify Blacks who were descendants of slaves and U.S. freedmen. And so, prior to the final decision, I was a little uncomfortable and I started reaching out to my elected officials in Ohio because I'm originally from Ohio, although I currently am in Texas, is where I work at the University Incarnate Word. Nevertheless, I thought it was important that we bring them on board. And this space is designed to kind of encourage you to do civic and community engagement in your own locales and in your own states, because that's really where you're going to have the opportunity to be most effective. I know a lot of times people try to do things in this area from their state and have it translate into a national or federal level. I'm not sure that's always possible if you don't get buy-in from your governor. So I just kind of want to give people an idea of the steps that I went through and the wonderful politicians who came around to kind of support our efforts to make sure that blacks who were the descendants of slaves and freedmen weren't being cut out, or the language I sometimes use, ethnocided in the process. So what happened is, I think it was like maybe a year before the decision came out, I reached out to my congresswoman and my sister, who were both state representatives in Ohio. One of the things I want to tell everyone to do is don't assume that your elected officials always know the things that are going on as it relates to some policy changes or as it relates to some administrative activities that might be going on. It, as you know, in the United States, we have three co-equal branches of government. We have our executive branch, which is the president and all the offices that fall up under his authority. You have the Supreme Court, where all the judiciary falls, the courts, judges, federal, all those fall up under their authority. And then you have the legislative branch, which includes our Senate and our Congress. And these are the persons who make the laws of the country. And they also do, oh, here go Dr. Dear. Yes, I remember now. I got it from, okay. So, and these people do the appropriation. So essentially, the Congress controls the finances of the country. And so when we share with our elected officials, they weren't even aware that there were being revisions to the race and ethnicity categories. And people think it's somewhat not a small thing, but it is extremely significant because as those persons who were the beneficiaries of winning the Civil War and the subsequent 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment designed to give us full citizenship, there has to be a way to document that this group is being transitioned or protected such that they can enjoy, or we can enjoy, that full citizenship right that was guaranteed to us. Does that sound good so far, Monsieur?
Yes, can you just speak more about, I know that you couldn't post a timeline, but about
Mhm.
how these revisions that are taking place, how they, just for folks who may not know, how they're connected to the census and how it's done every few decades, and why, and what
Oh
the,
yeah,
and
okay.
just specifics of the timeline, even though we aren't able to post it. But if you want to send it to me, I can post it too.
I actually can post the timeline. It's on my page, so I kind of put all of our pieces together. And so if you go to my profile, you'll see that. Because the other thing I want to
Okay, I'll
post
post it from there.
is, okay, is the document that I shared with the elected officials that talked about the 1867 address to the freedmen that took place in Washington, D.C. And that's when I learned so many Ohio elected officials were a part of that experience. And in the context of that 39-page document that I make available for everyone to read and share, there is explicit mention of the role of HBCUs and how HBCUs were designed as one of the means by which to bring justice to those persons who were uh, the freedmen. And so, as a result of this experience, as I said, I progressively reached out to my elected officials because I don't really know anybody like that seriously, but I knew a few people. So I started locally, of course, with my sister, and then I reached out to my congressperson, and they were all extremely supportive and surprised to find out this was going on because what happens is that every 25 years or so, the Office of Management and Budget reevaluates or reexamines the appropriateness of its race and ethnicity categories. And so this particular White House, under which the OMB falls, decided that they wanted to, do some, give attention to diversity and create categories that they felt were in the best interest of their agenda. And one of the things that was explicitly made clear to me is that there was an emphasis to give a special category to Hispanic Latino and also to a group called MENA. No one, I think, expected that we would show up like we did, requesting that they do a specific category to identify those persons who were the descendants of slaves and freedmen. Quite frankly, I thought we were the most involved out of all the groups who showed up to make our case as to why that was important. Even though in the criteria that they had, they said that, for sure, I remember explicitly them saying that race was not going to go away. But in the end, when you look at the federal registry note that was released in March, Black was the only one retained as a race category. I thought that problematic on several levels, particularly after the Supreme Court ruling of affirmative action, that which indicated that explicitly race-based initiatives, or in the case of that college admission, was no longer going to be acceptable. But they did give a window to allow for race specific repair for those groups who were directly harmed by the government. And there was explicit mention by several Supreme Court justices of Blacks who were the descendants of freedmen being an under inclusive group of Blacks. So that kind of served as our motivation as well. And so when I reached out to my elected officials, they reached out to the OMB and said they were assured that there was going to be attention to our concern. And I believe that was the case. And I thank Representatives Sykes and Sims, because I did see that when they released the federal registry note, they did mention the need to examine at a later date the request that we have a designation that explicitly provides disaggregation of vital statistics for those persons who were descendants of slaves and freedmen. But they also mentioned, as you know, other groups who were there, like FBA and ADOS. And so I did not consider that acceptable because we have a census that's coming up. And they have already started to do what's called the American Community Survey using their new categories. And one of the documents that Dr. Garrity and one of his colleagues submitted, and I agree with him in large measure, that they need to get rid of those definitions or absolutely shore them up because they're very inconsistent and capricious. And I feel like they literally hurt us as a particular group because they don't allow for the specificity, because they did not give us the Freedmen designation, United States Freedmen designation. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of what we were talking about. And I wanted to help everybody appreciate how this could potentially hurt us in terms of census counts and in terms of congressional appropriations of seats. So when you look at the census is often used to draw out or determine congressional districts, and that speaks to how you get represented. I also highlighted to my state representatives uh, how there were actually persons who we thought would represent us by way of legacy organizations like the Urban League and even some congressional members who wrote letters in partnership with other minority groups like the Asian Pacific Islander saying that they wanted to abolish the term Negro. And I found that extremely problematic as well. If for nothing else, historical preservation is an important part of academic and legal, preservation of a group's identity and being able to require that they be protected. And to kind of erasure those identifiers that are associated with us, I thought were not moving us in the right direction, especially when you created new categories for other groups. I explicitly reached out to them and said, I think these may potentially be civil rights violations against us. So that's where we're at right now. And I'm gonna be very honest. A lot of people have not been communicating as much since we are in an election season, but that doesn't stop me from reaching out to them. So one of the first persons I worked with was the director, um, Michaela Holly. She was the Civic and Community Engagement and Outreach Director for Congressional U.S. Representative Amelia Sykes, and she was fantastic. We met in person. She kept me apprised of what they were doing and communicating, and encouraged me to reach out to other elected officials, which is exactly what I did. So I drafted a letter that was to go to all elected officials. I outlined the problems with the federal registry note and how I thought was a civil rights violation. And I asked that they get on board with supporting a petition that Ohio serve as a pilot for a revised disaggregation scheme as it relates to those persons who are Black. And in that revision, it allowed for the historic preservation of those terms that the census has traditionally collected us up under. And it makes distinction between those persons who are descendants of people who immigrated here, and certainly after the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments. And so that was the idea there. And so Director Holly said, well, I said, well, I want to talk to the governor. I want to talk to my senator. And at the time, my senator was J.D. Vance, and he was not selected as the vice president. But I knew about him. And quite frankly, I liked him. I used his book, Hillbilly Elegy, in my freshman class when I was at Ursuline College in Ohio, when I taught there before coming here to Texas. And people don't know a lot about Ohio. We have a significant Appalachian population. And so I grew up with Appalachian whites. So I understood culturally a lot of the things he talked about in his book. And quite frankly, in my conversations with a lot of Ohioans, many of them are empathetic toward the experience of Black. And when I have talked to them, even though we're not focused on reparations, I've had conversations with my neighbors. A lot of them are quite upfront that they think that there's something that needs to be done for Black Americans, but they don't think it should be just every Black person. They think it should be those Blacks who are the descendants of those who were enslaved in the United States. So that was really interesting to see that kind of feedback. So I said, well, heck, I'm gonna just go on people's website and find phone numbers. And so initially, I think I made first contact with the governor's office, and that was a little slow. I reached out to the attorney general. And then I just called this guy from JD Vance's office. He was so nice. His name was Dougherty. Um, and so he put me in touch with Beth Bingham, and we met in Cleveland. And so at that time, as I said, JD was not the vice presidential candidate, but their office was very interested and concerned about what I talked to them about. So they were taking it under advisement. And then his general counsel reached out to me. And so me and him met, and I shared with him my concerns. And so they have all of the materials. And if people weren't interested, they probably would say so. I felt that the interest in what we had expressed was very genuine. Well, whether it is or not, I still have a plan B, because I'm going to work with some law professors so that if we need to go that route to protect our civil rights by way of not having these revisions implemented, I'm willing to pursue that as well. But I'm very, very happy with the response I've gotten so far. And so after reaching out to Senator Vance's office, I finally was able to make inroads with the governor. So I ended up talking with one of his administrators who has been amazing. And so he and I met, and we had, he met with other persons on our RPC subcommittee. And Dr. Darity is going to be joining us, him and Kirsten, afterwards, because I kept them in the loop too. Because I know a lot of people want to do like state and local reparations activities. That's not my idea of the best approach, because I think we sometimes give people false hopes that we're going to get reparations in this election cycle, and you end up having people being disappointed when it doesn't happen. But I think even if we did get reparations, we have to be able to protect ourselves in the context of any kind of wealth infusion that would come into our communities, whether it be in the form of those persons who are eligible for direct payments, or an investment as a form of repair to those persons who are descendants of slaves, which would be separate and apart, in my view, from what would be reparations. Because our position is reparations are direct cash payments like every other group who have gotten direct cash payments. So that's in a nutshell what we have been talking about. I also had the benefit of working with the National Park Service. A lot of people don't know about all the resources that are available for the preservation of African American history. And so, as part of being in ASALA, which is a group started by Carter G. Woodson, it's the Association for the Study of African American Life and Culture. We have a partnership with the National Park Service and the African American Civil Rights Network. And as a result of that relationship, there are resources for historical preservation activities and educational activities. So I got a lot done over the summer. I was able to work with my local community center. Our community is called Summit Lake. It is I think fair to say historically, well, it doesn't have the federal designation, but it has historically been predominantly black, but it absolutely was a red line area where a highway was sent through to kind of cut off the business district. So now there's been a pivot to all this revitalization and urban renewal, and I just been a real advocate working with our president of city council, another person who's been extremely supportive, and making sure that we don't experience gentrification that displaces the black residents who are there. In our family, my parents, my mom passed away last spring, and then my dad 2 years before that. But they were like the first black homeowners in our neighborhood. And so, without being too braggadocious, my parents did a pretty good job with their children. We are all the descendants of slaves. My mother and father came to Ohio from the great migration by way of Georgia and Oklahoma. And I decided to make an application for a historic landmark that would allow me to kind of build in our neighborhood and make sure that we make it, I call it, a sanctuary city states for African Americans. We have all of these sanctuary cities and states that are being created for new Americans. Well, I want a sanctuary space for those blacks who are the descendants of slaves and freedmen in our area. And I think we'd be able to make that case if we are able to get these kind of federal designations. In any event, when I put in the application, it went through a whole process, and there's a recording of that, and I could share that too later in the chat section. But we finally did get the designation, and so our home is the first ever residential historic landmark for a residential home in our city, and it's pretty cool. They did a big story about it. So I see that as a springboard for me to continue to do civic engagement. Over the summer, we were able to do some things with the local community center where neighborhood neighbors came down and talked about what would make the neighborhood safe and sound for them, including, addressing issues of housing, crime, and opportunities for work. Because what we're seeing in our neighborhood is that when you don't have the jobs, how are you gonna be able to afford the housing? So you'll have speculators come in and buy up the property, and the people there won't be able to buy the homes, and we don't want that to happen. And so, as I said, this was about giving my advice of how to effectively network within your own state. to advocate for the needs of your community, and to do it specifically by almost serving as a resource for your elected officials, where you kind of do the back channel research and then feed it to them to help them, because they're really like super busy, to help them understand what your needs are, and they can do the legislation. And you can avoid online grifters who are asking you for money to do things that your elected officials were hired and elected to do for you. And so that was what I wanted to share in a nutshell, just to open things up. Dr. Darity, as I said, him and his wife are on babysitting duty, but they plan to come in too. And I think he's going to talk too as well about the importance of doing these kind of advocacies. Another thing is important, and I'm just going to say this as like a side note. You have a lot of people who are in these anonymous sections, and you leave a digital footprint. And so one of the things that my father always told me when he was growing up, like he used to get mad because my father's like, you would think he wasn't paying attention because he was watching TV. But when we would sit on the phone, this is before you had cordless phones, so you had to sit on the steps by the TV, and we'd be talking. He said, "Why are you telling all your business? Why are you talking so much?" And that kind of always stuck with all of us. So I have a tendency to kind of do things in a way that I give people uh the room to do what they need to do. And so when you on these Twitter spaces and cussing people out or dogging out your elected official, just know that the same bridge that you crossed over and you put a gas light to, you might have to cross back over, again. So you just need to operate in wisdom as you get in any kind of public spaces. And of course, I want to sometimes say, "Hey, answer my phone call," but tempering yourself and figuring out when to reach out to people, and getting back to them is really important. And I haven't had anyone who has just totally not responded to me, but they were very clear that it was going to be difficult to do anything because one, they're not in legislative session, and at this point, um, JD is running as vice president of the United States, so I'm probably not going to hear a lot back from them until afterwards. But I'm approaching this as elected officials in Ohio and letting you all know what happened. It's so ironic because after I met with his director in Cleveland in the federal building. At that time, the assassination attempt hadn't happened. So they just had regular procedures and pretty much anybody could, get through. Then all of a sudden, everybody was shutting down their offices for direct contact. So you weren't able to just like make appointments. Best you could do is telephone and Zoom. So sometimes that kind of stuff happens too. But everyone did say that some of this stuff we will have to do after we're back in legislative session. But there was attention and concern about what I raised. I certainly felt like people thought that my concern that it was possibly some civil rights violations had some legs, and we'll just have to see what happens with it. I don't think that we can go forward with these OMB designations like they are. So that was it in a nutshell. What I wanted to share.
Thank you, Dr. Brown,
You're welcome.
for the overview as it relates to the OMB, Supreme Court implications, the preservation of our culture, and as well as engaging elected officials. And I'm thankful for the work that you're doing in your local community and with elected officials, and also kind of on a federal level to support us as a community in these within these federal organizations that do have significant impact on our lives kind of moving forward. I wanted to well, first I just want to say good evening to everyone on the call. My name is Mansoor. I'm a high school teacher in Massachusetts and a part of, well, I identify as an American freedman or a descendant of American freedmen, and I'm also on the reparations planning committee with Dr. Lisa Brown, who you just heard, as well as Dr. Darity, Kirsten Mullen, and Dr. McDowell. I want this I would like for this conversation to include voices of those who are listening, whether that be just questions or comments. But of course, with any questions and comments, I just ask and we ask that you just maintain respect and engage thoughtfully over the course of the conversation, especially as we have other members of the Reparations Planning Committee join us. But Dr. Brown, you had mentioned a lot of information as it relates to the work that we've been doing specifically with OMB, and so I just wanted to break it down and just really talk first about the OMB and these the ethnic categorizations. What ethnic categorizations are being provided in this revised census for descendants of American freedmen at the moment, and what would
Yeah.
you like to see specifically? What would you like to see specifically? And does it seem like the politicians that you've been engaging with are putting some fuel behind you and behind the OMB in order to make those changes apparent?
Well, as far as the changes, I can't say what they're going to do because I really feel like it really depends on what happens in the election. Because, as you know, the OMB falls up under the auspices of the executive office. So, whoever becomes president, they're going to have control over the OMB and may decide to do something completely different. That's why I thought it was important to reach out to those persons who had understanding about civil rights law and constitutional law because I do think that the potential for civil rights violation exists, especially in terms of equal protection. How can you create two new categories for one group and ignore and table ours without having justification? Just because people had different ideas was no reason not to give us that. In the first federal registry
What is
note, it was.
I was going to
Mhm.
ask what is the designation that you feel is appropriate, and what is currently on the revised OMB for those who aren't aware of
Yeah.
what the
Well,
edits are?
and I tried to put stuff in the jumbotron and it's not working. Can you see anything in the jumbotron?
I see two posts that I had put. The first one is showing the timeline since 2021 as
Okay.
far as the doings of the OMB, and the second post is the first page or the abstract of the article that Dr. Darity had written about the data collection
Get rid
without
of the
accurate definitions.
definitions of race. Yeah. Okay. So I was trying to put up the designations that I recommended. And also, is that document up there about the 1867 address to the freedmen in Washington, D.C., Arlington Heights? Is that in there? Well, if it's not, I will put it in there. Can you still
It
hear
is.
me?
It's in the first post. It's in the post with
Okay.
the timeline. Yeah, if
Is it
folks
put
want to
up
see
by
it, they just
me
have to
or
scroll through. I put it up. I added your
okay?
tweet to the jumbotron.
So none of the stuff that I posted is there yet.
It may be,
Oh,
but I don't see it.
okay. Because I was going to use that to respond to your question. So, what they initially did is create these, I would call them super categories or minimum categories, right? And so, those were, from my impressions, to allow for the most expedited data collection. And so, in the revision, they created a Hispanic Latino category, which is new, and the MENA category, which was Middle Eastern North Africa. And in that category, there are certain groups that had previously been considered white, like Egyptians, like Tunisians, and I think even Jewish people got put in MENA or Israeli background. I'm not sure because I focused on the black category. Well, in our category, they do a very odd thing. They create what's called Black or African American, but then they have a subset category called African American. So essentially, you can be an African American. And I thought that was silly. And I'm concerned about it being a means by which it is bestowing the Black identity to anyone except us, or allowing it to be embraced equally by everyone. And I think that that runs amok of the concept of historic preservation. And let's be honest, the United States was founded on a paradigm of this notion of manifest destiny. And there are plenty of persons who made the case or wanted to make the case that the United States should be a haven for white, identity. There were certainly many people who resisted that and actually fought against efforts to put that in the Constitution. In any event, because of this black white paradigm that existed in the United States, those persons who were enslaved were largely viewed as the opposite to the white identity. And so when you create these other categories like Negro and throughout the progression, Negro, that still was ascribed to our category. The Census Bureau, and I will also post that too as we continue, have a whole timeline of how they changed and adapted the identifier that was for our group. But they have never did it in such a way that it allows for unique disaggregation of us who are the descendants of slaves and freedmen. Where there is absolute legislation and requirements for repair and inclusion into full federal citizenship. As you know, people could be citizens of their various states, but it wasn't until we had the Reconstruction Amendments that it put to abolition the idea that you can be enslaved if you happen to go to one state that did not consider or honor persons emancipation or freedom papers, if that's the case. So those Amendments required that slavery be abolished federally after the Civil War. And that's why I like using the term United States Freedmen Descendants, because as you know, there were persons who were Indian freedmen. They are Black identifying. They were enslaved by Indian tribes. And their standing as freedmen actually happened after ours. But they had to force the Native Americans to release those enslaved blacks that they had or include them in their tribes. So they too hold the, in my view, U.S. freedmen designation, but they also, many of them retain their tribal affiliations. But they are identifying and don't deny that they are the descendants of those persons who were part of the transatlantic slave trade. So, in terms of where it currently stands, we are not disaggregated enough that you can tell us different from those people who newly arrive here, who can enjoy possibly the benefits of the Office of New America that was established too under this current administration. The other thing I found disturbing is this effort to kind of appropriate our identity instead of disaggregate and preserve it. And one of those was realized in the Freedman Bank activities that happened this year, where they opened up the Freedman Bank, not grounded in the fact that persons who were descendants of slaves and freedmen, but they pretty much kind of made it a people of color undertaking, which I too found very interesting and potentially problematic. It's like people are actively not trying to let us be in position to make our case for repair, whether that be through civil rights legislation or at some point even reparations, because you have to be able to have some means by which you can show the harm and also have standing to make your argument. And if you don't allow that designation while continuing to provide opportunities for others, we keep getting kind of like dogpiled on and not having our voice heard and ourselves represented in our government.
So with the phrase African American, because I think there are a lot of descendants of American freedmen who will see that term
Mhm.
and identify with it, right? The term African American. I think that's the term that sort of was what was adopted in the 60s and 70s, or after the 60s, when the term Negro sort of became outdated.
Well,
And so,
if you
yeah,
see what we put together and sent to the OMB, and Monsieur, if you can put up that one document we just sent in response to their public comment, that would be good too. We actually hold that
Okay.
identity of African American, Black American, and U.S. freedmen descendant is all the same people group. So we are arguing that those should all be considered a part of the group of those persons who were enslaved in the United States. Now, a person, the way that we set it up, a person who said, "Hey, I'm Black, but I'm not a descendant of Africans," okay, that's fine. Then you would just pick Black, you would pick whatever group you belong to. If you are Nigerian or Jamaican, then you would do that. And then you can write in American at the bottom. I think that the confusion comes in with race and ethnicity, which I don't think the OMB handled well. Race is an umbrella designation. And I've also heard people say the Supreme Court said we can't do anything by race. That's not true. And I think it's a gross misinterpretation of what they said. What they said is that you can't do something that's explicitly done by race to the exclusion of other persons unless it's as a form of repair because of harm that that government in fact did because of that race, identity. And Justice Thomas gave example of how the government had engaged in some kind of housing discrimination. I can't remember the specifics of it, but they certainly made clear that there were harms done to the freedmen. And Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was very adamant about how she felt like persons not having access to educations at these elite schools and a person who had a legacy admission access, it was, creating problems because those persons who were the descendant of the freedmen should have opportunity to engage in education and these elite opportunities. And there have been other scholars who have written about how that simple Black identifier ultimately ended up being where more elite immigrant Blacks were getting the slots, and those persons who were multi-generational descendants of slaves and freedmen were not getting these opportunities for admission. And you were seeing an overrepresentation of particular groups of people who could use the Black identifier. And my argument is that it's probably to the exclusion of those persons who are not being distinguished for having that multi-generational harm and discrimination through Jim Crow, redlining, overt, uh, you know, discrimination directed toward them because someone had considered them to be a descendant of slaves. I saw that judge in Detroit recently on social media where she explicitly said that she did not like American Blacks and had a preference for Blacks who were immigrant. And so she just said the quiet part out loud, but there's plenty of scholarship showing that that is happening. There have been people who tested applications and resumes that got sent to employers with a what would be considered a Black sounding name, like the person's name was Darnell Jefferson, and they would send the name of someone who sounded more foreign or immigrant, and they would not select the Black American person. And also in judging essays for law school, I saw another study, and they found more mistakes on the person's paper who they understood to be a Black American than a person who was not, and it was the exact same paper. And so that comes into how we get treated in terms of the criminal justice system. But if you don't have the variable disaggregated from the larger group, then you don't have the data to help undergird and make your arguments in case, whether it be before the a court situation, or it be the Supreme Court, or it be your local, organizations that are serving you in your state or in your city, in your municipality. You have to be able to show how these harms are occurring to you. And my fear is, and paranoia is, that there is a nefarious act not to give us this disaggregation, because it would move us toward getting justice and parity that is long overdue to us as a community.
Thank you. I'm attempting to find the link to the to where people can access that public comment, but I'm going through
Okay.
emails and I can't find it. But if you want
Yeah,
to try
I'll find it. I need
to
to
find
see
that in
how
your
I can
email and
get
forward
on
to
the.
me, I can add it to the jumbotron so people can access that
Okay.
public comment. But
Hmm.
it seems like what you're talking about in terms of the vital statistics that are needed in order to ensure our in order to ensure our justice and civil rights in this country. Are you saying that what we would need? Well, what you're saying is that we would need that categorization federally in order to use it to I guess build data that can
Yeah,
then
I
be
think that
used
there.
that can translate
Mhm.
into continued civil rights and
Correct.
sort of legislation that will benefit us. So
Right.
if that doesn't, do you think that's possible with the African American with the African American identity marker in the census? And if not, do you think that it's possible that that can change in these next before the official rollout?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it could change. It really a lot of this depends on the election, and who gets into Congress, who gets into the White House. But I definitely think that the sentiment is out here through all of the activities of many of the people in this room who have been actively engaged in advocating that this disaggregation, some people use the language disdelineation, needs to happen. And I want to speak a little bit about the incident in Springfield because that's in my home state. And so what I think that
Oh wait, hold. Before you speak on that. For those who are listening, please at any point if you have comments or questions, I think we can just you can request to speak and we can throw that in. Will that be fine, Dr. Brown?
yeah, that's fine. And I just want you to know I
Okay.
cannot access your DMs and it won't let me post in the chat. So they got me on lockdown. So I'm trying to figure out I'll probably
Okay.
have to instant message you some of these links that I wanted you to put in the jumbotron.
Yeah, that's fine, and I'll do it.
Okay.
But go ahead about the recent
The
incident. I'm guessing with the
Springfield.
judge in Springfield.
So yeah, so everybody knows about the situation in Springfield where there was they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and that became a big controversy. But I think that some people thought that was going to end up becoming a very racially polarizing situation. And I think it didn't because of two things. People don't understand how Ohio is made up. Now, Springfield is a relatively small town. It is just right outside of two major HBCUs, but there's a lot of Black people who are in Springfield. So, one of the things I wanted to put up for you guys to look at is that out of the top 10 cities in the state of Ohio, Black Americans are who are Black alone. That's how they identify Black alone, no other race, are the second largest population in these cities. But that was not necessarily it may have been the case for Springfield, but Springfield was not in the top 10 populous cities in Ohio. So what people don't realize is, like I said, there's a lot of Black people who were in Springfield and they were being impacted by the increase in migrants that were allowed to come there. You have a city with 40,000 people and then it balloons to 60,000. And then you have a stress on services and schools, healthcare, access to, you know, uh, safety net services like, food stamps and housing and stuff like that. And it really was a problem. And I think because people didn't realize how many Black people were in there and they were also complaining about the displacement that they were feeling. That story didn't become the kind of weaponization that they had hoped would happen. And you don't really hear as much about before. But my son-in-law's wife was from Springfield. People who went to school with me as an undergrad were from Springfield. We always kind of saw them as more like small town Black folks, not like people who came from Cleveland or Columbus and Cincinnati, and nicest people you ever met in general. A lot of these small towns around Ohio, as I said, there's a strong Appalachian population, and they have experiences that are very similar to the Blacks who came up from the South during the Great Migration. as it relates to, sometimes dealing with issues of poverty and social isolation or social devaluation. And one of the things I saw someone talking about, they were showing the town hall meeting, and I don't know if y'all ever seen it. It was a black woman on there, and she was quite honest about the racism she had experienced at her job. But she said that that wasn't about what was going on for her as a longtime resident of Springfield. It was the issue with traffic, the issue with language barriers, the issue with cultural differences that were creating conflicts for these small town folks, and that was not a function of not necessarily wanting them people there. It's just that they felt overwhelmed with the significant, unexpected increase. Their increase in migrant populations, I think, shot them into one of the municipalities that probably had a significant black population. But because we don't disaggregate, if you were to do any kind of data collection, all of the new Haitians would have been considered black if they did not disaggregate for those who are the descendants of slaves and freedmen. And so it's important to be able to have this vital statistics data collection so that you can accurately see that people are getting fair and just service, you know, in their communities. Did I answer the question, Mansour? Mansour, can you hear me? It looks like your mute button is on.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I haven't. I don't know if you've been seeing any requests to speak.
No, it looks
I
like
haven't seen
everybody's
any,
just
but
kind of. Unless,
okay.
is there anybody, can you do a heart emoji if you wanted to speak, or you just came to listen just to find out what we're doing?
Yeah, because that's if that's the case, I can request. I can send the invite.
Okay.
But
Mhm.
but yeah, I don't see anybody. Okay, so can you make some clarifications as it relates to? Actually, no, not even clarifications. The preservation of culture. You said that you have
Yeah.
been working with the National Park Service, but also
Mhm.
the organization Acorn, as well as HBCUs, are doing work. And so, what type of work is happening in that space, and how does that contribute to what's going on with the OMB right now, or does it contribute,
Right.
or is any of that work contributing with that at all?
Well, I think it is. I think it's an underutilized area for us to be able to make the case of our being a unique ethnic group with a unique history and culture in America that needs to be preserved. So, the African American Civil Rights Network, I want to say it's a relatively new organization. I don't know for sure. I have to look that up. But they are working directly with the National Park Service. So, there were all kinds of dollars set aside that are to be directed toward cultural preservation, and explicitly those that would target the preservation of HBCUs and historic landmarks that are a result of the American Civil Rights Network, uh, civil rights experience. And I think that the cutoff was not, it had to be like before 1954. So it's not even like more newer activities. But don't quote me on that because I would have to put, and I will put in the bubbles below the link to those meetings. But we met with them, and there are like millions of matching funds that states can use to help repair HBCUs. But one of the things I think is important when we continue to make this advocacy, and you'll see in that document that I shared from the 1867 address, that there was explicit mention of HBCUs being in place to provide for the freedmen and their descendants. And so, one of the things I think is important for us to do is make sure that the mission of the HBCU is preserved in terms of who it serves. And I know recently at Central State University, they hired the first I think president that was not, he was a Nigerian, and his whole work experience has been at Central State. I don't think he ever led another institution outside of Ohio State. And there was a real controversy with his hiring because people were complaining that they didn't get to see the applicant pool. And one guy, I think, was looking at suing because he said he was let go and felt that it was due to discrimination. And I think he was Indian American. So one of the things that I did when I first graduated, because I just assumed that if nowhere else after I graduated, I would find a job at a HBCU. That was not the case when I went and started applying. Quite frankly, I was surprised at how many persons who were in positions of power or in positions of hiring or positions of faculty administrator were not the people who were descendants of slaves. There was a significant amount of immigrant blacks at the HBCUs. And I was concerned about the long-term consequences of that, as I am with anything else that was designed to provide repair for our group. If we don't have a specific designation, how do we tell if we're getting into these schools and if we're being successful in these schools, whether it be as students or whether it be as faculty members or whether it be in the school's leadership to make sure it maintains its mission for serving these groups? Quite frankly, there's been this emergence, and I don't know if any of y'all seen this term. It's called Black Serving Institutions, and I think that that's going to end up being quite the quagmire, especially after the Supreme Court ruling. Because if you're a Black serving institution, wouldn't that be a race-based policy or race-based initiative? I think that that is going to get challenged. Now I know we have Hispanic serving institutions, but the thing that's really funny is it seems like nobody wants to challenge these kind of race centering activities until it's us. It seems like everybody gets to live. But I think that's why it's so important for us to get our designation as descendants of slaves and freedmen because it takes us out of this kind of generalized race category and puts us into a particular proxy for race that one can engage in restorative justice and repair for. And I think that's
and
what the
to do so legally, in
and to do
terms
so
of
legally.
Supreme
Yes.
Court declarations.
Yes. And that's why I think we all need to seriously ask our elected officials, what are you doing about this need for us to have this petition? I really feel like sometimes we have put the cart before the horse and trying to do these kind of local or state reparations initiatives because we don't have a clear uh, disaggregation of our group so that we can, come from a position of Supreme Court edicts that this has to happen for this group or it's going to be, consequences. So that was my thought about it. And that's the
Yeah.
case I've been making with my elected officials and getting their ears. I want to say one more thing about Springfield too, Mansour.
Go ahead.
I don't know if anybody else saw the man who I saw him on social media, and he was complaining about this is it looked like an older white man. He looked a little disheveled, but that might just been his nature. But he was complaining about the Haitian influx and said they're not even African Americans. And so I kind of said, "Oh, okay. Well, the message is getting out that we are a unique group, and that people are starting to see that the whole concept of flat blackness is not really appropriate when you're looking at multi generational groups of people who have been subjected to the harms of the federal government's neglect to do what it was supposed to do. And that without effective monitoring and I believe that we should have an agency similar to what we had before, but I have a different name for it. I wrote about it in one of my papers. But it is an agency that will be designed and ongoing until we actually reach parity with what the standard that Dr. Darity has used, which is that our wealth position is on par with those whites who had all of that support by way of the Homestead Act, by way of the GI Bill, by way of all of the Social Security Administration used to exclude us because they were slick about it and excluded domestics and farmers. And so you have all of these groups where the government is placing its thumb on the scale to pick and choose who's going to be winners and losers. And I think until we have that variable, because most people need to have statistics, because people really rely on being able to see the numbers.
Can
But
you
I think
can you
it's
just
going to be,
share real can you just share
mhm,
real quick, not to interrupt, but when you say
yeah,
statistics, what are some examples of some of the I guess the things that can be quantified for the
sure.
purpose of advancing our civil rights?
Right. So if you were to look at the phenomenon of maternal, child, and mother morbidity in America, which everyone is common knowledge that there are issues with Black women being able to have their children and them and both the babies survive. This has been a long-standing issue in our community. Well, is that just happening for all Black people, or is that happening explicitly for those Blacks who are the descendants of slaves and freedmen? And if that's happening to them, is that evidence of violation of those protections that were supposed to be afforded to us as we moved into full citizenship? And I remember that there were two, um, I think, Freedmen Bureau Act. I looked at the one in 1866 that followed the one in 1865. And it is clear in that act that the goal ultimately for those newly freed emancipated slaves and their progeny was full American citizenship rights and protections. And so I don't believe the idea was to call us eternally freedmen, but it was to recognize our relationship as their progeny and that those protections should follow us, um, you know, as they were to follow them. And so the other thing I mentioned, and I don't remember if I said that in here or, I think I said it in our practice session. So in the United States, we have a history of granting um, benefits to the descendants of people. The Social Security Administration does it. There's a death benefit to the children of those parents who receive Social Security. It happened with me and my siblings when my parents passed away. And they also, I think, even extended to grandchildren because I remember my brother who had preceded my parents in death. His children were entitled to part of that benefit. There have been court settlements. One of them was my grandfather. I didn't know anything about it. This random law firm came out of nowhere and told us that there was a claim um, because of my grandfather's exposure to some carcinogens, and that there was this settlement money first to his direct children and then their subsequent children. So there was a certain portion that went to my aunt, who is the only surviving sibling of my father. He was the oldest, but all of them had preceded him. It was seven of them. And so it was just him and my aunt Bev. And so they were to receive the money. And since my father had passed away, then his portion went to all of us. And so there is a precedent for the federal government being able to give wealth transfer to descendants of eligible recipients. So a lot of times, we kind of get caught in the weeds about how someone is going to get paid. And that's why having the federal designation is so important for us because it makes repair or it makes justice a lot more manageable because you have a direct person with standing as a direct result of what has been constitutionally made available to us. And so that's why I've just been very, very adamant about this OMB designation, not only for that, but just to make sure we don't get erased. When you talk about historical preservation, that's an academic field, but we have a whole National Park Service and a whole federal agency that looks to preserve national monuments and national landmarks and national history and the story of those persons who were enslaved in this country, as well as other persons' stories. I know you got Native American stories, etc. And they do have monies available for those kind of activities, as well as other groups. But they are very explicit with the establishing of the African American Civil Rights Network that provides money for historical preservation, restoration, and educational programs and activities. And those are available to us, as people who are, the children of those persons who came through the civil rights movement.
Absolutely. You know, earlier in this space and just throughout your comments, Dr. Brown, you were mentioning your engagement with elected officials. I'm not sure what municipalities and states are represented here, but
Mhm.
for folks who are listening and for folks generally, how can they, one, support the efforts that we've been making in terms of the revisions, the OMB revisions, and trying to push the OMB to revise the way in which they have categorized ethnicities, and in what ways can they engage their elected officials to push the needle on this issue?
Well, I think one thing they don't want to do is burn bridges. I mean, if you do, it is what it is. And so a lot of times you have to have some, what I would say, emotional discipline about how you approach people. I mean, there's an old saying: you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. Now I know that that's not everybody's approach, and I know some people are like, I'm kicking down the doors and burning all the houses. That's their approach, or they feel like they want to get on tables and cuss people out. Maybe that's effective in your city. I just didn't find it to work in mine. And my preference has been to make sure that I have the ability to get people to call me back, and so that I continue to do advocacy for my neighborhood, my community, and within my state.
So it seems like you are, and I want to do these things also, just making calls, sending emails. I'm wondering if it's
Yep.
possible to like create a sort of email template for folks to use and send to their elected officials that maybe links to the submission that we did on ResearchGate as it relates to OMB revisions. Is there a way that document can be used by folks to engage their elected officials towards this
It
end?
really, honestly, myself, it really has to be tailored to your particular state and municipality. Now, I know that in Ohio, we don't have a lot of immigrant blacks, you know, apart from the recent migrants. But in New York and California, they have significant immigrant black population. So they may get more resistance to a call for disaggregating than you would in maybe the Midwest or maybe in some southern states. So it really has to be tailored, and you always have to remember, and just in terms of like a little bit about my background, I have a undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry, and then I have a master's in public administration. So I kind of know how public administration works. And then, hey, Dr. McDowell. And then I have a PhD in adult education, learning, and development. And so, one of the things that I've come to learn is that people have to see what's in it for them. You have to be able to say, well, what can I benefit from this? So if I go to my elected official and they get to do some legislation that allowed them to make sure no one came into that community and gentrified it, boom, that's a whole little PR thing for them. And they're doing the good work they want to do. And I want to say something on behalf of elected officials too, because I think sometimes they get a bad rap. Some of them deserve it, but I was intentional and make sure that I worked with people who are willing to work across the aisles. Like I would not go into a situation and say, I ain't talking to no Democrats, I ain't talking to no Republicans. I'm gonna talk to people who can get stuff done. And like I said, when I reached out to Senator Vance's office, he actually beyond my congressperson seemed to get me the most movement. Because I talked to him. They put me in touch with his general counsel. That's his lawyer. And then they took the document and was sending it to their people. So as I said, everybody is like, a lot of stuff isn't going to happen, and probably, because we're not in legislative session until after the election. And I just respected them for that. But I already got all y'all phone numbers and y'all email. So on November 6th, I'm calling people, say, hey, I'm sorry you won, or I'm sorry you lost, or I'm happy you won, I'm sorry you lost. But what we gonna do about this? Because you still my elected official. And that's where the civic engagement comes in. You have to be able to go and have a view for the long run. Do I need to make Dr. McDowell a co-host? Let me see. Let me see. Invite to co-host. Okay, Dr. McDowell, I'm about to make you a co-host. Or I'm sending the invite. Because I can't put nothing in the Jumbotron. It's really frustrating me. I'll put it, for those of you, a lot of the stuff I'm talking about, I will put it in like what they call the bubbles or whatever that chat feature. But when I click on it, it won't let me add nothing. So
Well, if you like, you can just tag me in the comments of any post, and I
I
can just
know,
add
but
it to the jumbotron.
it doesn't let me DM you. And I've been talking so much, I ain't had a chance to go search through my stuff. I wanted you to post. So since Dr. McDowell is here, maybe she can talk, and I'll go look for stuff. Does that work? Because I know you want everybody to introduce themselves.
I'm
Um,
here.
yeah, Dr. McDowell, if you do want to just introduce yourselves to our listeners, and just
Sure,
mention sort of the
sure,
work that you're doing, and your relation with the Reparations Planning Committee.
sure. My name is Evelyn McDowell. I am a professor at a university, and I am with the group to. I've written an article about genealogy in our most recent book, uh, Black Reparations, and then I also work with the group to correspond with the OMB
Mhm.
about whether about setting up our a designated classification for people who descend from enslaved people. And I also work with the group on in contacting our elected officials on making sure that we get this special designation. So thank you very much. I apologize. I couldn't get to the call earlier, but I'm really glad to be here now.
Thanks, Dr. McDowell. One of the last things that we were speaking about was engaging with elected officials as it relates to pushing the OMB towards more clear and necessary ethnic categorizations, especially as it relates to the descendants of U.S. freedmen. And so, can you speak about the processes that you're using and working through in order to engage elected officials towards that end?
Yes, we have been working with primarily right now in Ohio, working with the elected officials there. We're trying to duplicate or try to set up I guess a role. I mean, a way to duplicate this throughout the other states. But we're speaking with members of elected officials in Ohio. We are engaging them by, of course, inviting them to our to functions like this. We are talking with them separately to answer any questions. We are telling them, especially in Ohio, a lot of people don't realize that the Underground Railroad ran through Ohio, and it's a
Yep.
very, very important state for us. And we are using, information like that to engage elected officials and letting them know how special a designation would be for people who descend from enslaved people. And it's waking a lot of people up, because we are a unique group. We're uniquely American in so many ways, and I think it's really high time for us to start letting people know that we need to have this special designation.
Mhm.
One of the things that we were talking about is how it's especially significant in this point in time as opposed to 60 or 70 years ago, because of the fact that there are many people who could easily, even though they don't descend, aren't in the group that we are in terms of descendants of U.S. freedmen, could easily identify that way, or choose African American on the census and be grouped in that way, and what that means in terms of not having correct data as it relates to our group.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I just wanted to open up the conversation to listeners. If there's a lot of information that we kind of just talked about in the past hour, and so if there's any questions or comments that you wanted to throw into the space and
Yeah.
contribute to the discussion, please feel
But
free to request to speak. Yeah, Dr. Brown.
yeah, and Monsieur, I just put a bunch of things that I talked about, and I sent it to your DMs because it wouldn't. It is not letting me get into the jumbotron. But one of them I really would like you to post is how I separated the black racial category, because I think a lot of people wanted to have some idea about that. And I know it's been a lot of debate online about some people saying that black is our ethnicity and that you can't be black and you can't be black. But I'm gonna tell you, I went by what the OMB gave us and what I understood from the assignment. They said, and this is where the contradictions come in too. When we first started this, they told us that race was not going away. But if you look at us juxtaposition in the white category, why didn't they have white or European? You know, they did us black or African American, but they did white and they allowed them all to fall up under the umbrella of white. And then you see all of these kind of disaggregations with Italian, German, and historically in this country, there are people who have gone to court to be classified as white so that they could appropriate the benefits of what that means in an American context. And I don't know why people keep trying to pretend that race doesn't matter, because this whole structure was built on this idea of um, a white paradigm or a white manifest destiny of a country that would be for those persons who were seeking, the American dream. And while our ancestors did all the work, and we ourselves, because we continue to be a part of the building and the making of what makes America the place that everyone wants to come to. I mean, look at all the people in this room. I'm sure that in your own spaces, you're doing fantastic things. Not to mention, that's always having to say what our ancestors did. Look what we're doing now. We fighting to make sure that people don't erasure us in terms of the history of this country. You can't talk about American history without talking about the role of the blacks in that American history.
And,
You have the explicit claim and salutation by Abraham Lincoln that had it not been for the freedmen, that the Civil War would have been lost.
and
So there wouldn't be no place for nobody to come to if our grandpas, grandmas, and all these other people didn't continue to fight this to make this a place to call home. And then Dr. McDowell, you may want to jump on this too. Even when there was an effort or a call to make us leave this country, our ancestors said, we ain't going nowhere. We built this. We stand right here. And so, how rude to do a whole program to send you somewhere else or to Liberia, and you've been here hundreds of generations, and send you many of those people who went there either were made unalive or they couldn't survive the biological change that had happened to them. that they did not have the immune capacity to survive in that environment. And that's why when you travel abroad, people don't let you bring like foods and plants and stuff for other countries, because there are some uh variety of plants that will be a detriment to the environment that you may be bringing them back to. I had a person who got a strike on their visa when they tried to come in with some tea and spices. And
Mm.
so I was out, you can't bring no apples, you can't bring no oranges and stuff like that, because there are indigenous populations that may fall prey to a new species being brought in. And essentially, and I'm putting on my biologist hat, that's what happened to those persons who were told that they were being, and I'm doing air quotes, repatriated to Liberia. I'm not a Liberian. I'm not an African. I'm a Black American, African American, descendant of U.S. slaves and freedmen. We became, through this sociologically imposed experiment of slavery, a new people group in this country. You will find no Black Americans outside of American as an indigenous group, because our indigeneity got created in the crucible of slavery and not having agency over our body, such that those persons who wanted to have their way with our men and women could produce children, and we didn't have the power to stop it.
Yeah, and for folks listening and maybe aren't aware of the history of that repatriation, if you just do a little research on the American Colonization Society, it was a society established to do just that and to repatriate Black folks, or at that point in time, people of color, and then even after the Civil War, freedmen back to the African continent. But we do have Sexy Ra, who requested to speak, and she does have the ability to speak if she would like to add to the conversation, question, or comment.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. Hi, Dr. Brown and Dr. Evelyn and Monsieur. I just wanted to highlight how I did find an old PowerPoint of how the OMB defined race in 1997. Dr. Brown, I did send it to you. The other thing I want to express is that I do work on the back end, attempting to get policy on the state and local levels as well as national. And what I have found, I know people may think, oh, okay, that some of us don't want to work as bipartisanship on reparations, but I want to highlight how we have, as grassroots, been very active on a national and a state level. Now, I will say that on the national level, we sent many of books to, as a part of our campaign, of Dr. Darity's From Here to Equality to many of the legislators. And then we also did some readings and things of that nature to help educate these individuals. And my experience thus far, even working on the state and local level, is that a lot of them don't want to engage us. And that's been the biggest issue that I've come across, is that they want to ignore us as if we're not here speaking. And so I just want to put that out there. So, I mean, we've been very hospitable. We schedule meetings. We create bills in anticipation that they are going to sit down with us and support us, or at least review the bills and edit the bills and let us know what, may need to be edited in, taken out, lingo, all of that, and still be ignored. So I just want to put that out there. Now, I decided to do something a little bit different and go and work with as many as possible that I can reach. It doesn't matter what party they are a part of. However, I'm finding out that there's not the ones that are really willing to hear and engage are not the ones that are in office right now. That's what I'm finding out. Is I'm fortunate. It's not like many of us that are in this position working on policy for the people are not engaging these politicians in a professional and respectful manner.
Well, thank you, Sexy Rob, for sharing that. Let me tell you what
Absolutely.
I found. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just
Can you
said
hear me?
absolutely. I just want to just
Okay.
thank her for the work she's doing and the education that she's
Yeah, yeah, and
pushing
I
pushing to
follow and
those.
listen to the stuff you're doing, Sexy Rob. But guess what I was told when I tried to do that? They said that it's now in my state.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
again. Can you hear me, Sexy Rob? Can you hear me? Give me 100 if you can hear me. Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I'll just say it so she can hear it on the recording. I
Okay.
found out that in my state, it's an ethics violation for them to accept books. Did y'all know that? So
Yes,
I was like, so they can't even accept the books, and if you send it them, you don't even know if it got to them or not. It might have went to a staff member. So that's why I say you have to know your state. And the other thing I said earlier, Sexy Rob, you really have to find out the what's in it for me concept with any politician. Now, when I approached our elected officials, I told them about their history of doing this. Like Dr. McDowell said, we got 5 routes on the Underground Railroad. We got a whole city called Oberlin, Ohio, that brags about no one was ever able to recapture an escaped slave and return them to the South, and that whole town existed with doctors, lawyers, preachers, college professors, and it was a thriving African American community. And so, and it remains today, a highly respected area. That's why when I put together the letter, I literally wrote it out and I put a space just like them people who I felt betrayed us in the OMB. I put a space for each elected official to sign off on it, and I sent it to the governor and my elects. Can y'all get people to support this? And can you tweak this so that we can ask that not Ohio ignore the OMB, because the OMB made space where each individual state could make adjustments as they felt appropriate. So, what I propose to our governor's office and our senator and our congressperson is let us be a pilot to create these disaggregations. Let us capture the data and let us see what we find, because Ohio has always sent representatives and advocated for the newly emancipated freedmen. And that's that one article I think Monsieur put up in the Jumbotron that was right after 1867. So I said, Ohio, this has been your history. Y'all not the enemy in my view. I'm just reminding you of your role in being a place while that was a part of the Great Migration, because Blacks from the South saw the job opportunity, whether it was in the steel mills in Cleveland, where Dr. McDowell is from, or it was in my town of Akron, the rubber city, because all of the rubber factories used to be in our city: Goodyear, Firestone, Goodrich, Mohawk. And our city used to be so wealthy from the income that was being generated by those corporations. But where did they go? They ended up going south and leaving, just like a lot of the steel mills closed down. So then all those jobs and all that, middle class wealth, uh, and job opportunity left when they left. And so you get pockets of poverty, and you get situations where people can't afford to buy a home like they did in the past. So in short, Sexy Brown, what I'm saying is find that part where you can pat them on the head and say, hey, y'all done a great job with this. And this is what we want to ask you to do that's consistent with your history of supporting us this way. Now, I ain't trying to be, pie in the sky and say that every state has the wonderful people. Like, we have a whole organization called BEDO in Ohio, Black Elected Democrats of Official, because I wasn't a real political stuff. My sister always was. But I always knew about BEDO. And I always knew those elected officials always looked out for, Black multi-generational Black Americans. So when I brought this to them, they was like, say what? And so I was able, to kind of work with folks. And like I said, in terms of, that significant Appalachian population, and my impressions about JD, I reached out to him, and first I thought I wasn't gonna hear nothing, but no, I heard back, and people was paying attention to what I was sharing with them. It's hard for me to do dichotomies and absolutes about somebody not being able to support you just because of race, whether they look like you, because everybody that look like you phenotypically might not support you, and some people who don't look like you may in fact support you. And I don't want to be limited to somebody telling me you can only talk to a Democrat because historically that's the only people that Black people. I'm gonna talk to whoever in my state got power. Cause see, I understand power and access and opportunity are an integrated reality. And so um, you have to be able to talk to folks who are going to be able to get things done. And that's one of the things I really admire about Representative Sykes, because her father is a state senator. So I mean, she kind of grew up in a political family, but she's a smart lady and she's an attorney. So a lot of, and even the one I was working with, who was the director of civic and community engagement, Michaela Holly, she is in law school, and she actually had to step down because she's trying to finish. But she told me she still wants to help and support me in trying to get this thing done so that we can protect the interests of Black people who are in the state of Ohio. Because it's a lot of them. It's a lot of us, and most of us are descendants of slaves and freedmen.
I just want to comment that I did add to the jumbotron the recent submission that we did with the public comments for the public comments for the OMB. And for anyone who's interested in sort of reading the article, it does explain further the need for categorization and kind of give suggestions as what those ethnic categorizations should be on the revised census that the OMB is in the process of revising.
Uh-huh. And thank you, Mansour, for putting up that one resource. So if you go up and jump, I can see it on my computer, but I can't see it on my phone. So if you can see there, I created a table from the 2020 census data about Ohio, and where were the largest, the top 10 populations in Ohio. And so you can see in Franklin County, which encompasses uh Columbus, which is the major city, there's over 1 million people there. And 22.6%, or almost 300,000 of those persons, are, by the population census of 2020, Black or African American alone, not Hispanic or Latino. So these are most likely folks who come from our lineage and background. If you look at Cleveland, which is the second most populous uh, city in Ohio, Cuyahoga County, second most populous county. You have over 1 million people, but Cleveland has the most Black people. So if you look there, they're headed toward almost 400,000 Black or African American alone. So that's why you see in election time people be seeing who are looking for Black votes. There's like what they doing in Cleveland, what they doing in Columbus, and what they doing in Cincinnati. Because Cincinnati got over 200,000, and they are 25.3% of the population of Cincinnati, followed by Dayton. And Dayton is very close to Springfield. And so Dayton is ranked number 5 in terms of the counties the top 10 counties, and 21.2% of Dayton's population is Black. And so in my city, Akron, it's a little bit smaller. The population is pretty big because we almost got like a 500,000, but almost 15% of our population is identified as those persons who are Black or African American alone. And we are the number two racial group in the city of Akron. So that's where, that's the homework, I guess I say you need to do. You need to know your state, find out where the big counties or voting blocks are, find out who those elected officials are there, and then you make your case with them. And you make it such that I know you've done good things in the past. Here's an opportunity for you to do another one to protect your voters. Because if your second highest voting block is Black Americans, and they in a position to be getting erased, that politician is gonna be concerned about that, you know, because a lot of times one of the things I didn't like or I don't like about politics is how people manipulate data. I'm a what's called a mixed methodologist. So my approach to data collection and research is both quantitative and qualitative. So what that means is I do look at the numbers, I do engage in multiple regressions and projections about statistics, but at the same time, I collect people's stories and I look for patterns and trends in the stories that people tell me. And so I can create credible, trustworthy narratives about what people tell me is happening to them. So if I'm going to the hospital, I find out that somebody finds out that I'm a descendant of slaves, I feel like they ain't treating me well. Or I feel like when I go into my job interview, there's some prejudices that are precede me where the person might not hire me because they think that I'm not going to work hard, you know? And so I collect those kind of stories and then I put those together and I complement it with the data so that I am able to present a more robust argument about what is happening to that particular group. And so, as I said, the first thing you need to know, like a lot of times we try to get like immediate gratification, or we know we in such dire straits, we want repair now. We want reparations now. No, we want it yesterday. But it may not go like that. But be careful that we not putting a cart before the horse or missing the forest because of the trees. Because if we don't get our designation, that's going to put us in a very tough spot to make the case that this country has an obligation to do those protections that our families fought to get. And
But Dr. Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how does it get to the point that we constantly as Americans have to fight for what is already ours as a part of our unalienable rights and the documents of the Constitution
yeah,
that already designates and delineates that for us as a protected class?
yeah,
So why is it that we always now, especially with illegal immigrants receiving reparations, and haven't done anything in this country, that we have to battle even them, for our just due what is ours and our piece of the pie as Americans?
well, I
I'm
think,
really over
yeah,
this, that we have to continuously wait and we are putting the cart before the horse when our ancestors been doing this work for us for hundreds of years, and we've had ancestors assassinated on this soil for doing and holding this country accountable for its
yeah,
documents. So I'm just really confused why it's always us having to wait on
yeah.
something
I mean, I
that
don't
is
think,
due and
okay.
ours.
I don't think we should wait on anything. And I think that citizenship is a lifelong um, proposition. I don't ever see myself not fighting for what I deserve because that's the nature of a democracy and that's the nature of power. And so, whether I'm fighting to get the elected officials I want, or I'm fighting to get the resources I want. That's the nature of citizenship, you know. And I can't answer the question for you, Sexy Rod. And you know my preference is Dr. Brown. Just wanted to mention that, but I can't.
Oh, sorry.
No
I
worries.
apologize, Dr.
No
Brown.
worries. I can't tell you that because I think that life is a struggle. And until we are in a position where we can you know, be those voices in the room, and we're just starting to realize people who we thought was representing us didn't represent us. And so it's just a lifelong the nature of citizenship to me, you know, to be civically engaged is not to sit back and say you've arrived and I'm gonna always get things easy. It doesn't work like that. And let's be honest, sometimes people give people other stuff in order to be a buffer against us. That happens.
So let me ask you
Mhm.
this: would you view it as us being as what they are? Some people are saying we're now being white supremacists because we are delineating and we're taking what is ours.
Absolutely
You
not.
know, it's
No, I
ours.
mean
It's not for
that's
theirs.
just
For them.
gaslighting. I'm not falling for that. You know, if you obviously have not done well in terms of your study and preparation for being a citizen in this country, because part of our inalienable rights is being able to approach our government for redress, no matter what it is. And so that's what we are doing. We are exercising our rights as citizen of this country. What the gaslight is you got some of our people who we think are going to be advocating for us, not advocating for us, and may in fact be doing advocacy for people who don't have citizenship. It is what it is. You know what I'm gonna do? Sit around and cry and go in the corner? No, I'm going to fight. Just like our ancestors have always fought. We fought to get out of slavery. We fought to get our civil rights, and we're going to fight to make sure we don't get erased in the land of our birth and you know current experience. We're going to fight to make sure that we get the justice and the fairness and equality in the land that we helped to create, that everybody now loves. I mean, I don't even believe everybody really love our country like that. But this is a great land of opportunity. That's made clear. We're just saying that opportunity needs to be made sure available to us who are multi-generational, you know, descendants of slaves and freedmen.
And you know what? And Dr. Brown, you are so right, and I appreciate Sexy Rob for bringing that point to the floor, because Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand," and we always are going to have to fight for what we deserve. I mean, that's just it, and we're never going to stop. But I've heard other people say, "Hey, how are you going? You as an African American descendant of enslaved people, you want your own designation. What are you saying about other groups?" We're not saying anything about other groups. All we're saying is we want to be counted.
Right.
We want to be counted. We want our history to it's different. We're not like every other group. We don't want
Mhm.
to be included to a point where we are erased. And
Mhm.
it's nothing about putting down anyone else. I mean and it really surprises me all the time when people say stuff like that, because nobody says anything when other groups want to be separately identified. Why is it that when African Americans want to be counted and separately identified is such a big deal, and we're saying bad about anybody else? I mean, that's definitely not what we're saying. I mean, there isn't, and then some people talk about this being a zero sum game, a game, and it's not, because if we want to be identified, separately identified, or it's not us against immigrants, it's not us against other people, it's just we want to be identified as a separate or a separate group of people, because we are separate. We, in terms of our story, in terms of our uniquely our unique American identity. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not any throwing any shade on anybody else. It's not meant to do that. And I get offended when anyone tries to say that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think it's very connected to our civil rights and our long-term health as a people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the center of it. And for folks that don't understand that, oftentimes, we have to remember that this is America and this is a country that was founded in anti-blackness, and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that extends from the past into the present. And so it's one, I love the country, but I also know this country and understand that anything that we do to advance ourselves, to protect ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
to ensure our rights um, is going to be met with resistance.
Right. And I always reflect on, I remember when we was learning how to swim, because when my school was named Lincoln Elementary School. And we was in a predominantly, like I said, black neighborhood. So I honestly didn't get exposed to any openly hostile, overt, racist experiences until I went to college. Because everybody looked like me, and everybody in my community is like me. And those who were there, where they were Appalachian whites or Greeks or my neighbors was Mexican. I practiced my Spanish with Aurora Vargas across the street, and then next door, the Cisneros Jr. showed me how to play acoustic guitar. So that's how our neighborhood was. It was still red line, And so when we were, and I mentioned my elementary school because our parents thought that we had a pool so that we would all learn how to swim. Because how they say black people don't learn how to swim. So our parents thought that our school had a swimming pool, and so we all learned how to swim when we was little. And it just reminded me, oh, when if anybody was in the pool and they was drowning, the lifeguard, the teacher didn't jump in and leave everybody else. They took that little pole and handed it to the person and told them to grab it, right? Because when a person is in a panic state, you jump in trying to save them, they'll drown you and yourself. And so our history as a people, because we've endured so much unfairness, we're automatically sympathetic to everybody else. But what we find is that after we open the door, people walk on top of us and say, "Oh, thanks for that," and wipe their feet on us and keep going. So there has been, in my view, uh, psychological, spiritual, and emotional paradigm shift in us that we've come to realize if we don't advocate for ourselves, if we don't get the generational wealth and opportunity that's denied to us, we're not going to be around to do nothing. And I think becoming a new grandma put in a different sense of agency for me, because I look at my little grandson. I would die for that little boy, and I don't want nothing to happen to him when I'm gone, that he be going to the store and somebody hurt my grandbaby. So I'm doing all this stuff for my future and our future, children, just like our parents did for us. And I'm particularly sensitive to people who say disrespectful things about our elders. You wasn't living back there. My mother lived in Jim Crow, and so did my father. My mother told me stories about Summit Lake, where they had one day where the blacks went and another day where the non-blacks went, or well, the whites went. That was her reality. That was my mama's reality. She lived in Jim Crow, Georgia. She had to be sent up north because she was down south visiting with family. And she said, some white man said, "Come here, gal." And she said, "No." And then my uncles and stuff rushed her back up south because she don't have the right to be telling no white man no. He said, "That girl, who she thinks she is." So my mother told me, my grandmother said, "Y'all put her on the first thing smoking and don't let her raise her head until she passed the Mason Dixon line." And that's came out my mama's mouth. And so these stories about what we experience as being descendants of slaves are not distant for us. They're very new and they're very relevant. And just like when you on a plane, and I never understood when they say if that mask drop down, put yours on first and then the child's, because I said, no, you gonna put the babies on first, because that's how I was raised. You look out for your children. That's how my mom was. But when you think about it, if you passed out, that baby ain't gonna make it. You put no mask on, And so I guess right now, Black Americans are putting our mask on, and we saving ourselves, and we unapologetic about it, because we've seen
As we
time
should
and
be.
time, and we've seen time and time again that when we've done stuff to help other people, they say thank you, and then the government puts its thumb on the scale to let them get a one up over us. And so what we saying is, no, we're going to demand that you give us what we have earned in this country. And we are going to use every ounce of our civic engagement and community engagement by way of educating our people and by way of accessing our elected officials. Nobody should have to come on Twitter and pay somebody else to do your advocacy in your state, and they ain't even in your state. And I'm not
Yeah,
fundraising for somebody who ain't in my state. I fundraise and send money to my elected officials.
I want to say that we have Coach TP who would like to share a comment or question, and maybe we'll be in this space for maybe another 15 minutes. Dr. Brown, I don't know if Dr. Darity has contacted you at all, but
Oh, I didn't even look, but I thought he said that they would be in maybe in the second hour. So
okay.
when will we start? Yeah, maybe they'll be in here soon. We'll give it a few. Let's just take questions, and then if it don't go nowhere, then we can close it out.
Coach TP?
Hey, appreciate the space, the host, co-host, Dr. Lisa Brown, Dr. Evelyn, and Mansour. Uh, I traced my
Appreciate you,
family
brother.
tree on my paternal side all the way to year 1815, Pamlico County, North Carolina, and my maternal side still going back, but it's definitely been traumatic. The 1897 Guilford County, Greensboro, North Carolina. My parents met each other here in the city of Philadelphia, where I was born and raised. They've since passed on, and the way that my dad got up here at 14 years old, 1955, heavy Jim Crow, uh, the hood wearing horse riding KKK shot him in his left eye, and I have the remnants of that. So does my only biological son. My father went in his grandfather's house, got the shotgun off the wall, and started shooting back. We've always exercised retaliatory justice, uh, and they were about to lynch my dad at 14, but because and we still have aired property down there. My maternal grandfather sold the judge a piece of land, and they broke him out up here to the city of Philadelphia. Because of the rain that messed up the pencil written address of his mother's sister's house, he couldn't read it. So my dad slept in cemeteries in 1955 in the city of Philadelphia all by himself at 14 years old. So I tell people first thing is to trace your family tree and understand who you come from. We don't come from cowards. We don't come from those who elected to take meritorious manumission. Go research that, because we're dealing with that now. You have people like the former mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, the president of the National Urban League, Mark Morial, who's been in our fucking way of us delineating, and we need to protest that. I've been digging in his family tree. Anybody that uses the term white passing, they are fucking enemy. Straight up. Straight the fuck up. Because my grandmother and grandfather, we covered a spectrum far as phenotype, skin color. You treated anybody any different, you got your ass whipped with a switch. You had to go outside and get
Coach,
it.
we don't do cussing in my rooms. Sorry.
My apologies. I just left a few other spaces, so my apologies with my passion. I'll choose some other terms other than profanity. But what I'm saying is, We got to protest those who elected to be a part of this meritorious manumission. It's in their epigenetics. I don't even I don't even listen to the hip hop artist Young Thug down in Fulton County, Georgia. But I've been following this case. If they didn't have any resources, they would be Ruth. And I don't know if they're innocent or guilty. I know that they're innocent until proven guilty. But you got people of our suspected family tree lineage down there, these uppity meritorious mission boule, Jack and Jill idiots mistreating our people. Because they want to be around these troglodyte Neanderthals under the U.S. Census classified as white European mafia peasant criminals to keep us in check. And we ain't listening to them no more. That's why a lot of them are getting fired. Uh, Jeff Bezos, who gave Van Jones that 100 million, created the organization. They just kicked him out and fired him. That's why he's back on CNN. You got Michael Eric Dyson, always bringing up this troglodyte Neanderthal woman that gave him all the books. He got fired. He's not on no national TV. Mark My Hill, he not on that. Like Don Lemon. Once they find out they have no more use for them to keep us in check, they fire.
Yeah,
So
I just wanted to
I,
jump on
I
that,
want to.
coach, real quick because there's this scripture that says there's nothing new under the sun. And I think about it's a story in the Old Testament about Queen Esther. And there was this man named Mordecai that wanted to kill all of her family, and she didn't want to go and advocate for her family. And her uncle, I think his name was Mordecai, went to her. He said, listen, either you go and advocate with that king for your family, or the Lord will raise up somebody else, and you and your whole family will perish. And I think that that's where we're at this time. Either you going to do the calling that you were called to do and do justice, or you will perish for being unfair, cowardly, and not speaking up. It is what it is. And that's where we're at one time. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, like when I went before our city council to get the historic landmark designation for our family, one of the people told me, well, I'm sure you want to do this so that other African Americans can follow your lead. And I was offended on one level because the person just assumed every black person's family history was the same as mine. Then I told the lady, I said, look, that wasn't part of the application process. I don't feel no application to say who else gonna do whatever after me. I'm following this application to honor my parents and also bring attention to my neighborhood as a historically black area that was redlined, and that my parents was the first one that was able to get through that and own their home. And so that's my attitude about that. And you're right. We need to get out of office those persons who ain't doing our business and say, bye. That's my Nene meme. I love that Nene meme. She be like, bye bye. Because that's what you got elected for, to represent your people. And that's one of the things I say about Representative Syke, and I didn't come in here to big up people. Her and my sister, they are clear that they are bringing home the dough to their districts, and they will make no shame about it. And I think that we need to understand the role of our elected officials, so we not getting finessed by people who are telling us to send them money, and they ain't even in our state.
Yeah, I'm in a Democratic stronghold, the city of Philadelphia. If you ever hear, uh, back around I think 2007 or eight, uh, our ancestor, the late great radio personality extraordinaire, Dr. Reggie Bryant on 1480 AM and 900 AM WRD, sent out a herald because at the time the National Park Service had allocated funds. They were going to make the Liberty Bell an inside tourist attraction with shops and everything from 5th and Chestnut to 6th and Market Streets in the city of Philadelphia. And when they began to excavate the soil, they excavated our ancestors' bones and grave
Oh,
sites, and they tried to cover it up, and they were just going to put a plaque up there. But we went down there. It was less than 20 of us, and we had strategically did it between the first shift. getting relieved by the second shift. So we had traffic blocked up from South Jersey, Ben Franklin Bridge, the center city of Philadelphia. And the news came out. And the only congressman in this country had enough courage and guts to stand on the congressional floor, and he went to prison for some other shit. Excuse my language. But I know why he went to prison with Shaka Fattah.
Mm,
He stood up and said that they were going to properly recognize and memorialize and honor our ancestors.
mm-hmm.
And I didn't go back down there until 2 years ago. And it's a grave site. It's open 24/7. And at the time, I went over there and began to speak the sacred language our ancestors left us.
Mm-hmm.
I just began to just tell them, Malala you and Tut. And our ancestors connected with me. I was in a suit and tie. I had to go down to a meeting. I was on the ground, fully engulfed in tears, uncontrollably.
Mm-hmm.
And our ancestors let me know to let us know that they are here, they've been here helping us this whole
Yeah.
time, spiritually, actually, on their soil.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to learn that language that they left us. It's more than us communicating with one another. It is our spiritual connection and power to our ancestors on this soil.
Mm-hmm.
And they let me know that they are giving out instruction. If you got 5 minutes, 10, 30 of every day, they're not giving out instructions every day, but sit in silence.
Yeah.
I have a composition book and I just write down the instructions.
Well,
And
coach,
they let me know to let us know.
I know people have different beliefs about their faith because I don't pray to ancestors, but I do believe that God can use people on our behalf, and I pray to the Creator. I don't pray to ancestors, but I mean
No,
every
I
person.
didn't say pray.
Okay.
They didn't say
Oh, I
pray.
don't get
I said
messages from
listen.
ancestors. That's what I'm saying. And I
And,
don't
and,
know
and
Tut. I do know Spanish and Pig Latin, though. But I want to make sure we get to some of the other hands because I see NDO has had his hand up. Monster, can you see him?
Yes, I see NDO. I just
Okay.
wanted to say thanks to Coach TP for your words, your stories, and for reminding us that we do have to hold our elected officials accountable to the needs of the people that they're supposed to be representing. Appreciate you,
Yep. Agreed.
Hey, I
NDO.
can.
Oh,
well, to biblically back up that our ancestors are with us, Hebrew 11:1 says we have a great cloud of witnesses
Oh,
among
I
us.
know that
Excuse my
scripture too. Yeah, they watching. Agreed.
yes, thank you.
I do believe but
It-
I want to say, I want to bring up that, something that Coach TP said, about finding out, doing your family tree. And I want to just put a pin in that because that is something that we all need to do. We all need to know who came before us in our own families, and we need to know them by names. I do feel driven by the spirit of our ancestors. I feel that. And if you look at most of the world, and especially Asian cultures and African cultures, um, all these other cultures feel the spirit of their ancestors. I mean, just about everybody in the world. For some reason, in the United States, we don't do that as much. But I do want to say that Coach TP is absolutely right. You need to know who your ancestors are, and I think that everybody should be doing that.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. McDowell. Completely agree. NDO, did you have a comment or question? And as stated previously, you know, please no profanity and just maintain respect.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just kind of got into the room. So like, do like each individual state have their own OMB?
Dr.
No,
Brown, you want to take that one?
no, it doesn't. The Office of Management and Budget falls up under the auspices of the executive branch. As you know, in the United States, we have three co equal branches of government. People seem to think we have a dictatorship. You have the executive branch where the president, the vice president, and all of the federal offices reside. You have the legislative branch, which is where our Congress is, that's made up of the House and the Senate. And then you have the judicial branch, which is overseen by the Supreme Court. And all the judges, all the courts fall under their auspices. And so, what has recently happened is that the executive branch had encouraged the Office of Management and Budget, under which all 14 federal agencies fall. That means Health and Human Services, the Department of uh, shoot, the Census Bureau. I mean, just all federal agencies. You can just do a quick search and you'll see all of those agencies fall up under the executive branch. And then subsequently, the OMB manages all of those. They report to the OMB. And so the OMB, every 25 years or so, reevaluates race and ethnicity categories. And these have implications federally. So what they come up with, all of the states have to follow. And so, in this recent iteration of changing and examining the race and ethnicity categories, we felt that they fell short to provide the disaggregation we requested through their public comments process. And I think that was made evident by them reopening public comments for the upcoming American Community Survey, which will be the first kind of implementation of those revised categories on the federal level. They did leave space for states to tweak it if you can, for lack of a better word. But our argument to
Yeah.
the state of Ohio was,
Why? Nothing. Why?
Indio,
I
your mic
know.
is still on. If you could
yeah,
mute it, please.
yeah, and our argument is that those categories have actually done us harm than provide the kind of granularity that was promised to all who participated in the process.
And I just wanted to mention that for any folks who did come late and are maybe confused about the OMB and ethnic categorizations that are recently under revision, we spoke about that at length at the beginning of this X Space, and so when it's done, the recording will be available on our pages.
Yep. So it's like a few minutes after 8. So we've been over here for a couple hours. Are there any other questions or comments people want to make? And yeah,
I
I'm
have.
happy to share anything that I've done with people. I mean, this really was a surprisingly expeditious summer for me because I have been working with my congressperson for over a year, and they have really been doing a great job of making sure the OMB was attentive to our concerns. But when the final decision came out in March, I was livid. And so when I was able to come home in May, I spent this whole summer just knocking on doors and making phone calls and sending emails and positioning my elected officials to do advocacy for us. Because, as I said before, most of the Black population in my state are those who are descendants of slaves who came up through the Great Migration. We don't have large pockets of new American Blacks who came in here outside of areas except like Cincinnati and Columbus mostly. Because I think Columbus is a sanctuary city. I don't know if there's any other ones in our state that are sanctuary cities. Any last words from the co-host?
Yeah, I want to again just mention an organization called Sons and Daughters United States Middle Passage. I'm the president of the organization, and that organization is a lineage society for people who are descendant of enslaved people, and we encourage folks to find out who that enslaved person is in your family. How many I personally have found up to 35 enslaved people in my family, and it really does help if you can identify that person. And I want to just say, if you have not already, talk to the tomorrow, call the oldest person in your family and find out who they remember where they were born, get their names, and where it in and location, dates if you can, get all of that information, and start working on your family tree. If we ever get to a point, and I'm going to speak it into existence, when we get to the point when the country wants to to reconcile, or yeah, that history, and close the wealth gap, and the only way they can do it is through some sort of reparation program. You're going to have to be able to show that you are a descendant of enslaved people. And in order to do that, you need to know your family tree. So I'm just giving you I want to just give everybody an encouragement to do that. It is life changing, to know who, your family and your history. It's one thing to hear people talk about roots and all that. Well, you have roots yourself. And when you find out the people in your family, and some of the things that they have done, the amazing things, it will enrich your life. And it's been such a joy to know my history, and to know of those enslaved people. I get power from them, and you will too.
I'll say some words, and then Dr. Brown, you can close us out. But I just want to say thank you for everyone who was listening during this conversation. I also wanted to give a special shout out to Actify Press and the good work that brother's doing. Um, and lastly, just to continue having these conversations, continue to educate the people around you, and reach out to your locally elected officials about the significance of these ethnic categorizations, and about the significance of us having our category, that we can then get the vital statistics we need to ensure that we are receiving justice, and our rights aren't being infringed upon as a people group. And once again, like I had said before, just for the long term health of our people group. And so yeah, just have a great night, and please stay abreast of the talks that we do in X Spaces, and we hope to probably resume this with politicians and other folks after the election cycle.
Yep.
Thank
Great point,
you.
Mansour. And thank you to Dr. Did you want to say something else,
I
Dr.
just want to
McDowell?
say thank you to Mansour for co-hosting this, and Dr. Brown for gathering, or creating the space. And I just want to just thank my fellow co-hosts.
Hmm. Yeah,
And thank you
and
to
I
you
just
too, Dr. McDowell.
and I want to say thank you to everybody who's hosting these, what I call non-formal adult education spaces in social media. We keep hearing people say Twitter ain't real and this stuff. This stuff matters. And I have learned, as well as I feel like provided, insights to folks. So please keep doing that. Do exercise some critical thinking skills, and don't just take everything that somebody says to be true. There's plenty of ways for you to vet this stuff. And unfortunately, just because somebody loud, they can be loud and wrong. And so just guard your heart, guard your mind, guard your knowledge, and trust but verify. That's all I got. Well, y'all have a great evening. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you.